Episode 151 of the Interpretation Station is called to order. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. How is everybody doing? This is an episode especially for all my Russian people, interpreters with Russian in their combination. Now, you'll notice that the background for today's episode is a bit different. Well, that is because I am not at home. I'm not in the Interpretation Station headquarters, but rather I am in sunny Sharm el-Sheikh here in Egypt. Yes, I've been working at the COP27. I arrived here on Saturday, was working Sunday, so I'm here for 2 weeks. But not to let my subscribers, my viewers down, I have, of course, gone to every length to ensure that I can still make Interpretation Station episodes. So here I am. Now, I'm not going to bore you with all my anecdotes about all these sort of global masters of the universe that I have seen since I've been here. However, I will just, with that, we'll now move on to the nitty-gritty of the episode. And like I said, it's for Russian speakers, interpreters for the Russian in this episode. And the statement I've got for you, it's not actually from the COP, it's from the statement that was delivered at the general debate in New York, I guess about a month ago now. Sergei Lavrov, the foreign minister, was the man chosen to deliver the statement. So obviously you can imagine it's quite an important one given the whole global context currently. So we're going to go through it at very high speed. It's quite a long text, but I'm really going to try and whiz through it because there's such a lot of important vocabulary. And there's a lot of, just a lot of phrases that he uses, a lot of references that are inevitably going to crop up in statements delivered by Russian delegations speaking in lots of other international geopolitical media fora. So it's a really good one to know. It's interesting when you play the video of Lavrov delivering it. Usually when he's delivered in the past, when he's spoken to the General Assembly, he tends to go, his sort of approach is he goes very fast, and it's almost quite haughty, it's quite arrogant, his delivery. Here his delivery it seems a bit slower, it seems more measured, it seems more, it's not as cavalier, shall we say. He's not as cavalier as he usually is, I guess, given the severity of the gravity of the current situation. So anyway, the way we're going to do it, I'm just going to share the screen with you, put up his statement, and we're going to really whiz through it. My suggestion to you is to try it for yourself. I think it's about 15 minutes long. Try interpreting it yourself. I'm going to leave the link to the original audio in the description box as ever, together with a link to obviously the transcript. So interpret it yourself, record yourself, and then come and watch my commentary on it. See if you can learn any new tricks of the trade, any new solutions, and and before we go on any further, just remember to please like the video, subscribe if you haven't done so already, all the usual stuff, and like at the end, if you've learned something new, please do feel free to put something in the comments. Tell me what you've learned, if anything, from the episode. So without any further ado, let's get on to Lavrov's statement. All right, everyone, so here we go. You want to buckle up, because like I say, we're going to be moving very fast through this. You can see there are 10 pages to get through, so we're not going to be hanging around, okay? So a statement by Lavrov, 77th session of the GA, General Общеполитическая дискуссия. By the way, that's just something useful to know, okay? Right off the bat, that's how they say the general debate. I think the first time when I started working, I heard Общеполитическая дискуссия. I didn't know what that means. I think I just translated it as general political discussion. That's not right. Okay, that is what they call the general debate. Okay, in Russian, Общеполитическая дискуссия. Okay, distinguished President, distinguished Secretary General, ladies and gentlemen. We live in difficult, I think we can say, difficult, dramatic times. Crisis phenomena are growing. The situation in the field of international security is fast degrading. Strimительно, I think you just say fast. Fast deteriorating, fast degrading. Okay. Instead of frank or candid dialogue, honest dialogue, and the search for compromise, we are dealing with disinformation. Grubimi insinuировками. Now, I would say for grubimi, I think gross, I tend to go with grubimi just because the GR at the beginning. Now, insinuировками, I guess the first thing that came to mind here was gross disinformation, misinformation. Another idea I just had looking at Multitran was false flags. Now, is that too much of a leap? But that's certainly an expression that's used a lot these days, false flags, when certain events appear to be staged. Okay, there's a good word, staged, to provoke a certain reaction. So have a think about that. So staged. I'm glad that word came to me. But also the idea of false flags. So shall we say gross misinformation and provocations. The policy of the West is undermining trust in international institutions, as well as organs for согласовать интересов, harmonizing interests and in international law as a guarantee for justice and protecting the weak от произвола. Now, there is a word arbitrariness. I don't like that word. It sounds a bit clumsy. Maybe from diktat. Okay, I like to go these days when I hear произвол, diktat. Negative trends in a concentrated form can be seen in the walls of the UN. Which rose from the ruins of German fascism, rose from the ashes. For this, pojawiła na oblonka. Maybe you want, oblonka is literally like the debris, the ruins. Maybe in English we talk about the ashes of German fascism and Japanese militarism, and was created with the goal of facilitating the development of friendly relations between its members and preventing conflict between them. Today, we are settling the issue of the future world order. This is clear to any impartial observer. The question of will that order be with one hegemon, forcing everyone else to live according to their пресловутым правилам. Now, if you look in the dictionary, the first option you'll probably get for пресловутый is notorious. Okay, forcing them to live according to their notorious rules, which is, it's okay. I've got a feeling in English we'd more likely say dreaded. We often talk about dreaded, okay? They're dreaded rules. It's a very pejorative sort of word. Now, dreaded and notorious don't quite mean the same thing. But in the context that they use in sort of these often in these Russian speeches, you'll find that they're almost interchangeable. I think they use it again later, and again later I think you'll see that it could be either, if you want to play safe, stay with notorious, or if you want to show off a bit, go with dreaded. They're dreaded rules that are beneficial only to them. Or will it be a democratic, just world, a world without blackmail or intimidation? Неугодных. Again, this is a word that comes up a couple of times in this text. Dissenters, I think, is my sort of safest go-to word there. Intimidation of dissenters, those who don't, those who think differently. But that's a lot to say, okay? I guess if the speaker's going slowly, you can say it then. But a good one-word solution for неугодных is dissenters. Without neo-Nazism or neo-colonialism. Russia has firmly opted for the second option, and we, together with our allies, partners, единомышленниками. I mean, these three words, союзники, партнеры, единомышленники, they're all more or less synonyms. I think under, if you were going fast, no text, you could probably just say two. You just say with our allies and partners. If you want to get in that idea of единомышленники, you could maybe see those of like mind, our allies, our partners, and those of like mind. But again, it's a bit of a mouthful, so you got to pick your battles. I think it'd be fine if you just said allies and partners. We call on you to work to put this into practice. В прошлое уходит однополярная модель. Okay, so the unipolar model of global development is a thing of the past. Okay, if you want to stay if you want to keep the syntax of prošlo uhodit, and you want to say that, you want to render that immediately so that you don't forget, you could say a thing of the past is the unipolar world of global development, which served the interests of the West, of the golden billion. Now, this is a concept that's very unique, it seems, to the Russian world vision, the golden billion. Okay, I think that it sort of seems to talk about that 1 billion of the 7 billion of the world's population who live in relative wealth, I guess, and relative prosperity. It's not an expression I've really run into in other languages, but it's useful just to recognize it when you hear it, because I've heard also Putin use that expression in his statements. And I would actually look it up on Wikipedia. If you look it up in Wikipedia, and actually the first definition it gives is the golden billion is a conspiracy theory that indefinite, undefined elites pull strings to amass wealth and destroy regular people's lives. It is popular in the Russian-speaking world. And then it gives you a bit of an explanation. I'm not going to go into the whole explanation history. I would advise you, though, just read through it, because I think it's an expression that you will run into a few times when interpreting Russian statements by Russian leaders, shall we say. Whose overconsumption for centuries обеспечивалось за счет. Okay, this is a new solution I've found that you could see has been provided by the resources of Asia, Africa, and Latin America, if nothing better springs to mind. What about has been underwritten? Okay, this is a word that I've heard used. I think it works very well when it comes to who's paying the bill for something, okay? Has been underwritten by the resources of Asia, Africa, and Latin America. Today, the становление, the establishment, the consolidation of sovereign states ready to protect their national interests is leading to the formation of an equitable, socially oriented, and sustainable multipolar architecture. However, objective geopolitical processes are perceived, воспринимаются, by Washington and it's completely подчинившимися ему правящими элитами. It's completely subservient. I think is the best word for подчинившиеся. Subservient, ruling elites, governing elites of the Western countries as a threat to their domiнирующем положении. You could probably just say to their dominance, the dominant position. But I mean, again, Lavrov is a fast speaker, so you want to cut wherever you can with him. The US and her allies want to stop the tide of history, маховик истории. So if you look up маховик in the dictionary, I think they call it a flywheel, as in on a car, okay? Obviously, that sounds a bit weird in English, though. So I think often we would perhaps talk about, the tide of history. Sometimes you just have to think on the spot a bit. If nothing was to come to you from Machovik, you have to improvise. They want to stand in the way of history would be the most simplest way of doing it, perhaps. At some point, having declared victory in the Cold War, Washington возвел себя чуть ли не в ранг посланника Господа. So we say Washington basically declared itself tantamount to God's messenger on earth, God's envoy on earth, посланника, who had no commitments and only священное право, only holy, only sacred rights, безнаказанно действовать, to act unpunished, to do as they please, however and wherever. This is a bit of a tricky next sentence coming, or at least the word order. The zone of such actions could be declared as any state. Now, the thing is, in English, an English speaker would probably say such a sentence the following way. They would probably say, and any state could be declared a zone for such actions. But in the Russian, annoyingly, they flip it around. So you have to slightly tweak the syntax. So perhaps you can say, the zone of such actions could include any state, particularly if не угодило самопровозглашенным хозяевам мира. So how to do this не угодило, particularly if they'd got on the wrong side of the self-declared masters of the world, masters of the universe, if particularly if they'd upset the self-declared master of the world. Again, you've got to find some way of conveying that notion. We all recall how they unleashed aggressive wars against далеких американских берегов Yugoslavia. How to get this idea of далеких американских берегов? I mean, I think again under pressure, you could probably just say how they'd unleashed these aggressive wars against distant, far-off Yugoslavia, Iran, Libya, taking the lives of hundreds of thousands of civilians. So there's an argument, I think, for just dropping from American shores. If you really wanted to get it in, you perhaps say they unleash aggressive wars against those far from American shores, such as Yugoslavia, Iraq, Libya. So maybe that's one way you could do that, to include the reference to the American shores. Now, did any one of these countries really affect, undermine the lawful interests of the West? Did they prohibit English or the language of other NATO member states, Western media, culture? Did they declare the Anglo-Saxons нелюдями? Now, obviously, this is a reference to what I think the Ukrainian authorities declared the Russian speakers at some point нелюдями. The problem is, I think, this is, literally like inhumans. I don't think they would, in English, that's not what would be used in that situation. I think when you talk about the Second World War, the Nazis, I think did they call the Jews subhumans? I think that's more the word that's used in English as opposed to non-humans or inhumans. So perhaps you want to again tweak it a bit. Did they really declare the Anglo-Saxons subhumans? Did they use heavy artillery against them? And what were the results of these adventures? Or a good word, when this is always talking about military adventurism, so these escapades, if you want something a bit different. Improvements in the human rights situation or the rule of law, stabilization of the social political situation, improved well-being of the population. Name one country where Washington intervened and where life became better as a result. Okay. Trying to revive, to revive the unipolar model under the banner, under the slogan, under the banner, the rules-based order. Okay, that's an important notion to be able to immediately trot out when you have to. That's very much the vision now that's promoted by the West. The rules-based order. The West everywhere seeks to draw, насаждать разделительные линии, so maybe tries to draw dividing lines in the spirit of block confrontation. You're with us or against us, либо с нами, либо против us. You're with us or against us. No third option is possible, no compromise. Continuing бездумный курс. So I thought here maybe continuing the reckless policy of expanding NATO east, bringing military infrastructure of the bloc closer to Russia's borders. Now the US has declared задачу, the objective. I think objective sounds better than task. I know you're always taught for задача that task is your sort of go-to solution. I think this objective is a bit of a slightly higher register. Has declared as its objective subjugating the Asian space. Okay, подчинить. Okay, subjugate. When you're doing it to someone else, we had before. What do we have before? Подчинившимся. Okay, it was used here, right, as an adjective. It's subservient. ruling elites. Now here it's used as a transitive verb, so I think the best solution when using as a transitive verb is subjugate the Asian space. At the June NATO summit in Madrid, the, как он сам себя называет, the so-called defensive alliance declared the indivisible security of the Euro-Atlantic and the Indo-Asian Pacific region. Again, pod lozungom, under the banner, under the slogan of the Indo-Asia Pacific strategy, they are creating closed formats, closed door, maybe if you want to sound a bit more fancier, closed door formats that undermine, and here's one of these big compound adjectives, в создававшуюся десятилетиями вокруг ASEAN открытию. So all that is one huge, great compound adjective, right? So that, you know, if you want to follow the syntax, which is so important, you might want to say undermining what has been created over decades in ASEAN in terms of the open and inclusive regional architecture. That's the, again, it's not, doesn't sound like beautiful Shakespearean English, but that is the best way to process all those words and sort of still stick with the syntax as you're going along. To undermine what, so throw in that what has been created over the course of years in ASEAN in terms of, or namely, the open and inclusive regional architecture. В дополнение ко всему, on top of all this, they are затеяли игру с огнем. Okay, they're playing with fire over Taiwan, promising it, pledging to it a military support. It's clear that, and here's our пресловутая again, okay, that the notorious Monroe Doctrine, the dreaded Monroe Doctrine, I think, again, either could be used pretty validly here, is gaining global scope, global proportions. Washington is trying to turn the whole globe into its own backyard. The instrument of coercing dissenters, несогласных, again, this is this idea, неугодных, несогласных, okay, dissenters, принуждение, coercion, it's an important concept these days, of coercing dissenters, are unlawful unilateral sanctions, which for many years have been adopted in violation of the UN Charter and задействуются and are used as an instrument of political chantage, blackmail. The cynicism of this practice is clear to see, plain to see, because the restrictions hit civilians hardest, preventing them from gaining access to товарам первой необходимости, essential goods. I think all that could be summed up in essential goods, including medication, vaccines, food. A вопиющим примером, okay, literally, so a glaring example, a prime example, maybe you would say more readily in English, though, is the over 60-year-long American blockade of Cuba. The UN General Assembly has long and with a vast majority of votes called for its immediate lifting. You lift blockades, all right? This is the most natural sort of collocation in English. Отмена блокады. The UN Secretary General, в чьи обязанности входит, whose duties include facilitating the implementation of General Assembly decisions, should pay special attention to this problem. The SG, let's just call them the SG, we'll move to an acronym, has a special role to play in mobilizing efforts to overcome, to surmount the food and energy crises that broke out as a result of uncontrolled денежные эмиссии. So this is all the money, all the debt that was created during the COVID crisis. So I think the best way, I mean, okay, monetary issuance, literally, but I think we talk about money printing. I mean, that's the word that's really that's the expression that's really used sort of pejoratively when when governments just massively increase the national debt. So I think you could say here uncontrolled money printing in the US and EU during the pandemic and the irresponsible actions of the EU on hydrocarbon markets. Rynku uglevodorodov. In spite of basic common sense, zdravому smyslu, common sense, Washington and Brussels, usugubili, you want a couple of synonyms for that, have compounded the crisis situation by declaring economic war against Russia. The result has been a rise in global prices for food, udobрение, fertilizer. Okay, that's very important because obviously there's, I think, Ukraine, or that whole region, Ukraine, Western Russia is one of the biggest global sources of fertilizer for crops, oil and gas. Now we welcome the efforts of the SG contributing to the signing of the Istanbul arrangements. Whenever I hear dogovorенность, I tend to use arrangements as opposed to договор, which is more treaty, соглашение, agreement. The Istanbul arrangements of 22nd of July this year. However, these arrangements need to be delivered on. They need to be implemented. And for now, vessels or ships with Ukrainian grain, for the most part, are not going to the poorest countries. And what was created by the US and the EU in terms of financial and logistical obstacles to the passage of Russian export of grain and fertilizer have still not been fully lifted. Okay, that's again one. Look, there's a lot of these sort of long compound adjectives, right? Созданы США и ЕС финансовые логистические препятствия. Maybe you could just say, and the US and the EU's financial and logistical obstacles to Russian export of grain and fertilizer are still far from being lifted. What's more, 300,000 tons of fertilizer is being held in European ports. I guess we'd also, if you want a really sort of high register word, has been impounded in European ports. We have long proposed giving it free of charge, bezplaty, to needy countries in Africa, but the EU doesn't want to do this. Official Russophobia has reached in the West an unprecedented, grotesque scale. Там уже не стесняются. So good. I might say here, they no longer have any qualms about openly stating their intention not only to inflict on our country a military defeat, but to destroy and расчленить, to dismember Russia. So I think you can just go literally use that, that direct like for like word in English, dismember Russia. In other words, they seek to wipe from the political map of the world an overly independent geopolitical величины state. I'm not quite certain why he uses the word this величины here. A landmass, perhaps, an overly independent geopolitical landmass. Now, how in reality have Russia's actions in the last in recent decades ущемляли интересы оппонентов, impinged on the interests of her opponents? Perhaps they cannot forgive us that thanks to the position of our country, it was possible to have the military strategic разрядка thaw between 1980 and 1990. I think that's the best the best solution for разрядка in that respect, the thaw, like ice melting. Maybe you could say that our country's position made possible the military strategic thaw of the 1980s, or that back in the day we We voluntarily dissolved Organizację Warszawskiego Dogoworu. So in English, we call that the Warsaw Pact. You don't need to call it the Warsaw Pact organization. So just call it the Warsaw Pact. And again, распустили, again, that's an important word. It's important to have a good solution for that. So just to dissolve. We're dissolving parliament, for example, when elections are called. Dissolving the Warsaw Pact, depriving NATO of any sense of its existence. Stripping NATO of its raison d'être. Now, there's a really high register way of rendering that expression. Stripping NATO of its raison d'être. Bit of French thrown in for you there, eh? That we supported the unification of Germany without any kind of conditions and in spite of the position of London and Paris. Or that we withdrew our armed forces from Europe, Asia, and Latin America, or that we recognized the independence of the former Soviet republics, or that we believed the promises of Western leaders not to expand NATO by an inch, Nina Dum. I think that was the pledge that was given by whoever it was. Was it Helmut Kohl, perhaps, the German leader at the time? I think it was him who gave that pledge not to move NATO an inch further east. Not to expand NATO a single inch further east. And when that process did start, agreed to effectively legitimize it by concluding the Russia-NATO Founding Act. That's what that's called, Основополагающий Act. Or perhaps we violated the interests of the West by preventing, предупреждая его об неприемлемости. Now, literally, you would say, warning them about the inadmissibility, of moving, threatening military infrastructure towards our borders. So again, you can do it the word for word way. Now, I'm actually going to make I'm meant to be making one of the interpretation station shorts specifically on this use by the Russians of this expression, предупреждая о неприемлемости, because the other day it came to me, a really good solution came to me, where you don't have to just talk about this, warning them about the unacceptability, the inadmissibility of doing whatever it is. I think the most concise way of rendering this phrase is warning against, cautioning against. So, or did we violate the interests of the West by warning them against moving threatening military infrastructure towards our borders, cautioning against? So do you like that solution? If you do, tell me about it in the comments. The arrogance of the West, American exceptionalism. Okay, that's an important concept to be comfortable with. Okay, that's the word that you're really looking for. That's what the Russians always have a dig at the Americans about the American talk of American exceptionalism. American exceptionalism gained a particularly destructive nature after the end of the Cold War. Back in 1991, Deputy Chief of the Pentagon, Paul Wolfowitz, in a conversation with... Now, I actually had to look up exactly what his title was. With Supreme Allied Commander of NATO in Europe. That was the official title. I guess, though, if that wording didn't come to you in the moment, you need to sort of improvise a bit. I don't know, you say maybe Commander of NATO Forces in Europe, Wesley Clark, or just simply NATO Commander in Europe. But his official title was, as I say, I've got to look at, hang on, Supreme Allied Commander Europe. Was it Supreme Allied Commander Europe? That's a very famous conversation, actually. There, I know what he's referring to, and you can see that on YouTube, actually, that conversation that they have. In fact, he's going to tell you what he said, okay? Openly admitted to, I quote, after the end of the Cold War, we can use our military without fear of sanction. I'm ad-libbing here. I can't remember exactly what he said. We have 5 or maybe 10 years to cleanse these surrogate Soviet regimes such as Iraq and Syria until a new superstate appears that can able to challenge us, quote unquote. So yeah, look up. I'll put a link to the actual the original. It's like it's there. It's on. It's openly available. I'm sure that one day we will find out what, in fact, what American strategists had thought up, had cooked up for Ukraine and Russia. However, their plans are already clear. Perhaps they cannot forgive us for, at the request of the US and the EU, we supported the arrangement reached by then President of Ukraine, Yanukovych, with the opposition to settle the crisis of February 2014. The arrangements, again, they're using this dogovorенности, the arrangements that were guaranteed by Germany, Poland, and France, and were overnight trampled over by the heads of the bloody coup d'etat, who humiliated the European mediators. So if you recall back in February, there was some agreement reached that was with the guarantors of which I think was Sarkozy, Merkel, and the then Polish leader. Some sort of temporary settlement appeared to have been reached, and the next day, basically, Yanukovych fled the country, if I recall rightly. Запад лишь развел руками. The West simply shrugged its shoulders, crossed its hands, and watched in silence as puchisti. I think you can say putschists. I think they often I think in English we often refer to, I don't know, during the Russian Revolution, the revolutionaries then as the putschists. The putschists started to bomb eastern Ukraine, where they refused to recognize the results of the coup, because its organizer had возвели враг. Again, this is the second time he uses this expression of возвести враг. Again, I think declared to the level of, had elevated to the level of national heroes, нацистских приспешников, Nazi collaborators. I like when they talk about the Nazis often, and this приспешники. I think in English we certainly talk a lot about collaborators. Collaborators, причастных, who took part in, who were complicit in zvěrským etnickým čistkám. Zvěrsky, so I like as my go-to solution there, as the appalling ethnic cleansing of Russians, Poles, and Jews during World War II. Okay, so these are words that are good to have these three words actually, приспешники, причастны к зверским, okay? So, as I say, collaborators complicit in appalling ethnic cleansing. There are other solutions, but those are my sort of top ones. For приспешники, you can also have their associates, their henchmen, their acolytes. It's always pejorative. What? And so what? Were we meant to just accept Kiev's policy to ban the Russian language, education, Russian media, and culture, with the demands to expel Russians from the Crimea, to declare war against the Donbass, the inhabitants of which, both the then and current Kiev authorities, have declared не людьми, not people, а существами, устами своего высшего руководства. So they've declared them not people, but maybe creatures sounds suitably negative and offensive. I mean, again, it's an entity, isn't it? A существо, a being. But you again in English, you want something, to convey that sort of derogatory tone. Maybe you say creatures out of the mouths of their own senior leadership. Now, perhaps Russia has upset the interests of the West, has violated the interests of the West, by playing a key role in ending what was unleashed by the Kiev neo-Nazis in terms of hostilities in eastern Ukraine. Again, I'm trying to stick with the the wording here, if you're following this, because you're like when doing Lavrov, the chances are you're going to be following him pretty closely. You don't want to really let him go very far, to escape too far. And then called for the implementation of the Minsk complex of measures. I mean, you can call it complex of measures. I think you can call it the Minsk Accords, the Minsk Arrangements, whatever, which were unanimously approved by the UN Security Council in February 2015, but were buried by Kiev, were ditched by Kiev with direct participation of the US and the EU. So we have repeatedly for many years proposed agreeing on the rules of coexistence in Europe based on the principle of equal indivisible security. Okay, that's a very important concept for the Russians, equal and indivisible security. As agreed at the highest level, or as stipulated at the highest level in the documents of the OSCE, where nobody would enhance, bolster their own security at the expense of the security of others. The latest proposal on the need to make this principle legally binding, we put forward in December 2021. На что получили высокомерный отказ. I think in English the best way to say this would be perhaps which was just brushed away. Okay, that idea to brush something away encapsulates in itself that whole idea of высокомерно. Okay, so высокомерно, you might say condescendingly, okay, arrogantly. I guess if you want to, if that's being brushed away doesn't come to you in the moment, you could maybe say to which we received which you could say something which was arrogantly rejected. Высокомерно, I mean condescending, I think is perhaps, it's quite a long word, condescending. Seems it's quite a long word, but so if you can try and incorporate into your work the idea of brushing something away, because it's a good quick solution for that whole idea, that concept. Here's another tricky word. Okay, недоговороспособность, the contractual incapacity. So I've come across this word in previous interpretation station episodes. I remember there was an episode on Syria when the Russians were talking about how the US was saying that the Syrians they doubted their contractual capacity. Okay, so I remember it from that, but unless you watch the whole interpretation station back catalogue regularly, you might not have run into that word before. But so literally, you could say the contractual incapacity of the Western countries. Now, another idea that comes to me when I hear недоговороспособность is the idea of deal breakers. So maybe I would say here the Western countries are deal breakers. End of sentence. And the continuation by the Kiev regime of its war against its own people left us no choice than to recognize the independence of the Donetsk and Lugansk People's Republics and launch a special military operation to protect Russians and other inhabitants of the Donbass and to eliminate the threat to our security that NATO had consistently created in Ukraine. The operation is being conducted in line with the Treaty on, I have to go and look this up actually, the exact wording. So the exact wording that's used is the Treaty of, where are we? In line with the treaties on friendship, cooperation and mutual assistance between Russia and those republics based on Article 51 of the UN Charter. I mean, actually, it's all pretty straightforward here. The treaties on friendship, cooperation and mutual assistance. We believe that na naszym mieście, so I guess in English we say in our shoes, in our place, you can also say, but if you want to take it that next level up, in our shoes, any sovereign any sovereign, self-respecting state would have done the same, recognizing its responsibility to its own people. Okay, Запад закатил истерику. The West kicked up a fuss, kicked up hysterics, if you really want to get a good word. If the idea of kicking up, I know it's harder, obviously, if you're not a native English speaker. The West was hysterical over, again, we have a long compound adjective here that starts with проходящий сейчас and that goes all the way down to referendum over. And again, if you want to follow the syntax, you don't want to, you don't want to let him get away from you over what's going on now in the LNR, the DNR, in Kharkov and Zaporozhye Oblasts in Ukraine in terms of the referendums. Maybe you can guess. This was delivered right at the time. I think they were holding the referendums, so you could have a guess, but that's always a bit dangerous. But I think, again, the easiest thing is just to try and follow the Russian syntax by saying in what is taking place currently in Lugansk, Donetsk, Kharkov and Zaporozhye Oblasts. You can use oblasts, by the way, in English, of Ukraine in terms of the referendums. But the people there are only responding to what, in one of his interviews in August 2021, was recommended by President Zelensky. Back then, he advised everyone who felt Russian for the Radi Blaga, for the good of their own children and grandchildren, to ubirаться в Россию. Again, this ubirаться is quite strong, isn't it? It's got a definite, again, pejorative connotation, to clear off back to Russia, go back to Russia, buzz off to Russia. So the inhabitants of those regions are now doing just that, and they're taking their land, they're taking with them their land, they're taking their land with them. Любому непредвзятому. So any impartial, any neutral observer can see things clearly. For the Anglo-Saxons, as he's often using this now, I've noticed that Lavrov, Putin, the Americans and the British, the Anglo-Saxons. For the Anglo-Saxons who have fully подчинили себе, again, here we have this подчинить, who fully subjugated Europe, the Ukraine is a расходный материал. I was thinking maybe a bargaining chip in their struggle with Russia. I think it's maybe even a bit stronger than a bargaining chip. It's like the idea is that it's expendable. It's just an expendable item in their struggle with Russia. Okay, but I think you could say bargaining chip. Or again, Ukraine is just expendable in its struggle with Russia, if you don't want to go into any. I think in English that sounds perfectly fine as well. NATO has declared our country a direct threat towards total domination of the US, and as its long-term strategic challenge, it has defined КНР, Китайская Народная Республика, China. At the same time, the collective West, headed by Washington, is sending out to absolutely all countries, bar none. Often that's a solution I use for this, всем без исключения, all bar none. To all the other countries, bar none, a устрашающий signal, a terrifying signal. It could be you. The idea is here that you could be next. If you could be next if you step out of line, if you dare to step up, посмеет ослушаться. Okay. One of the consequences of the West, I think I've just объявлено of a declared crusade, крестовая похода, crusade against, again, неугодный, here we go again, against dissenters. Again, an English speaker might again say it again, their crusade against all those who stand in its path. But again, it's a few words, those who stand in its path, whereas dissenters is just 3 syllables. So again, you've got to make the choice. Depends on you, how confident you're feeling. Is the progressive upadek, so we say the progressive decline of multilateral institutions that have been turned by the US and its allies into instruments for implementing their own корыстных интересов, their own hidden agendas, their own ulterior motives. So remember those two as good two synonyms. Эта линия насаждается в ООН. Okay, this is the line, this is the policy being pushed in the UN, in its Human Rights Council, UNESCO, and in other multilateral institutions. They've effectively privatized OSHO. Okay, that's the OPCW, the Organization for Prohibition of Chemical Weapons. That's an important acronym to recognize. Desperate attempts are being made to prevent the creation within the BTWC, KBTO, okay, that's the Biological and Toxin Weapons Convention, the BTWC, of a mechanism to ensure transparency for the hundreds of military biological programs of the Pentagon throughout the world, including along the perimeter or around Russia's borders and throughout the Eurasian space. The fact that these programs are anything but безобидны, harmless, is borne out by the evidence, неумолимые факты, by the unambiguous, the unequivocal, that's maybe the best yet, the unequivocal evidence that has been highlighted in the territory of Ukraine. It's been discovered in has been discovered in the territory of Ukraine. Видим напористую линию. We see maybe just a firm policy, a stubborn policy. Also, it's like good to have the idea of, in all these things, they seem hell bent on. That's a really good, strong expression in English. You could maybe say they seem hell bent on privatizing the UN Secretariat, introducing into its work neoliberal discourse, ignoring cultural civilizational diversity of the modern world. We urge that attention be given in that respect, as called on by the UN Charter, to ensuring fair geographical representation of member states in the structures of the Secretariat, preventing a stranglehold by one group of countries, if you want something fancy for Zassilya, preventing dominance of one group of countries, preventing one group of countries monopolizing things. So those are some ideas. I looked up and again on multi-trans Zassilya, and I say stranglehold is one of the solutions they gave me. I quite like that. Preventing one group of countries gaining a stranglehold. The intolerable situation, the unacceptable situation has emerged over non-compliance by Washington with its commitments under the agreement between the Secretariat and the US government regarding the duties of the host country of the central UN institutions to provide normal conditions for the participation of all member states in the work of the UN. Now, this is a very long-winded way of, this is called the host country agreement. And you probably don't tend to run into this outside of the walls of the UN. But yeah, it's the agreement basically that the host country allows the UN to sort of be a neutral player while hosting it on US soil. But again, I think if you do know your UN stuff, and if you're really struggling at this point, you could probably get away with saying the failure of Washington to live up to its commitments under the host country agreement. And that would more or less account for all this verbiage that Lavrov uses when talking about the finer points of this agreement. Such obligations are vested in the UN Secretary General. Inertia here is unacceptable. Не могут не беспокоить. So this expression не могут не. So I'll often say, we can't help but be concerned. Well, that's a bit of a double negatives are a bit tricky in English. Maybe I often say we are inevitably concerned by the efforts of certain countries undermining the prerogatives of the Security Council. There's no doubt that the Council and the UN as a whole should be adapted to contemporary, to modern realities. Within perspective, we see prospects for democratizing the work of the Council exclusively on the basis of expanding the representation of the countries of Africa, Asia, and Latin America. In particular, we note India and Brazil as key international players and worthy candidates for permanent membership in the Council, with, at the same time, enhancing the profile of Africa as a must. It's a bit tricky in Russian, this приобязательном повышение, because if you say with the mandatory or with the compulsory raising of the profile of Africa, it's not quite that compulsory and mandatory. So, it's more to do with having to follow the law. So you sometimes have to just sort of put that in as a must, and maybe you could say and as a must, enhancing the profile, raising the profile of Africa. Because if you say mandatory, it's as though there was a law that explicitly demands that. Okay. Today, like never before, for all member states to unambiguously, недвусмысленно, or categorically, unambiguously, good synonyms, without reservations, без оговорок, without reservations, to confirm their commitment to the purposes and principles, very important UN Charter language, purposes and principles, the UN Charter as the first necessary step towards restoring collective responsibility for the destiny of humanity, of mankind. So the destiny, the fate of mankind, okay, synonyms again. That was the goal in July 2021 of the creation of the Group of Friends to Protect the Charter. A co-sponsor of which was Russia, and which included around 20 countries, okay, about 20 countries. Maybe you want to, with these expressions, they have соучредителем который, maybe you want to sort of just break it up into smaller sentences to make it a bit more manageable. That was the purpose in June 2021 of the creation of the Group of Friends to Protect the Charter. One of the co-sponsors was Russia, and it includes about 20 countries. The group set as its objective guaranteeing strict adherence to the universal norms or standards of international law to counterbalance пагубным односторонним подходом. Again, this is a useful word to have a couple of solutions for. Destructive unilateral approaches, or deleterious, that's a bit more of a tricky word to say, but okay, they both start with D-E, destructive, deleterious, so maybe it's good to remember them as a little package. We urge all those who share this position to join us. In that context, significant positive potential is carried by or lies with движение неприсоединения, the non-aligned movement, the BRICS, the SCO, the SCO, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, and ASEAN. The Western colleagues who've aggressively foisted their understanding of democracy as the model for organizing the lives of societies of all countries categorically refuse to be guided by democratic norms in international affairs. The latest example is the situation in Ukraine. It seems that Russia, in detail, has justified, has substantiated, that's a good, okay, обосновать свою позицию, so to justify, to substantiate its position. The West has declared its disagreement, and so the other remaining members of the international community should be able to decide for themselves what position to take. I mean, that's how it works in democracies, right? When competing politicians отстаивать свою точку зрения, argue their own case, is what we'd perhaps say most naturally in English. Argue their own case. Okay, if you want literally, again, protect or defend their position. But the US and its allies don't give anyone the freedom of choice. They threaten, выкручивают руки каждому, they twist everyone's arms. Okay, that's an important expression, idiom, as it were, to have, to be able to reel off immediately. They twist the arms of anyone who dares think independently. That's no democracy. That's pure dictatorship. Создается устойчивое впечатление. One gets the firm impression that Washington and its subservient, okay, so this is similar to the idea of подчинившийся, okay, so again, the best, I think, the most suitable adjective here is they're subservient. Europe is trying to maintain its its dwindling hegemony exclusively through prohibited methods. I didn't know прием could, I had to look at it. I mean, usually it's like reception, isn't it? Прием, but yeah, so it can mean like prohibited methods. Сплошь и рядом, all around, here, there, and everywhere, whatever. Methods of diplomacy are being replaced with unlawful sanctions against strong competitors in the economy, sport, the information space, cultural exchange, and overall in the sphere of contacts between people. Taking the same problem with visas for delegates at international events in New York, Geneva, Vienna, Paris. This is just an attempt to eliminate the competition, eliminate competitors, to prevent alternative points of view in multilateral discussions. That's what democracy is. So I don't know if he actually says this in the statement, because this section is all in square brackets. So perhaps he skipped. I can't quite remember. It was a couple of weeks ago since I actually listened to him to the original video. So, but again, this is some very useful. Whether it's in there or not, just remember some of these expressions: substantiate, arm twisting, subservient. Schools, they're waning, they're dwindling hegemony. Fading. Okay, lots of it. Okay, fading, fading, wading, dwindling. We are confident in the need to protect the UN, to cleanse the world organization of everything confrontational and nanosnova, I guess harmful, destructive, and to restore its reputation, or its standing, if you want just something different, an alternative to reputation, its reputation as a forum for frank discussions, to seek a balance of interests between member states. This is the approach that we are guided by in promoting in the UN our national initiatives. It's fundamentally important to seek a comprehensive ban on the deployment of weapons in space. This is the goal. Maybe again you want to put a full stop here, makes it a bit easier to deal with. This is the goal of the Russian-Chinese draft international treaty, which is before the Conference on Disarmament, which is being considered by the Conference on Disarmament. I think you could just say before, which is before. That, of course, is it called the PPWT, the Prevention of the Placement of Weapons. Yeah, so it's called the Treaty on the Prevention of Placement of Weapons in Outer Space, and you will run into that. That's quite an important treaty. That's one of the a big sort of joint initiative between the Russians and the Chinese that the West, though, is fairly opposed to. Special attention needs to be given to protection of cyberspace, including agreeing in the context of Рабочая группа открытого состава. I had to look this up. This is the open-ended working group. Okay, I can't remember if he just gives the acronym or if he gives the full name. It's the open-ended working group of the General Assembly on arrangements towards ensuring. So again, I had to look this up, actually. МИБ, okay, МИБ, Международная информационная безопасность, International Information Security. So again, I don't know if that's used widely as an acronym, but it might just be one to watch out for. So on ways of ensuring international information security and developing within the Special Committee a universal convention on combating the use of ICTs. Okay, that's an acronym you can immediately leap in when you hear in Russian they start talking about informaционно-коммуникационные технологии, ICTs, for criminal ends, for criminal purposes. We will continue to provide support. Just note for non-native Russian, that's actually the future tense, okay? It's not we are continuing, but we will continue to provide support to Управление по контртерроризму. Okay, that is called the CTED, the Counterterrorism Executive Directorate. Or rather, I think that's what he's referring to. It's called the CTED, the Counterterrorism Executive Directorate. Perhaps if you want to play safe, you just say, well, can you provide support to the Office on Counterterrorism and other counter-terrorist organs within the UN system. But I have a feeling that's CTED. I remember that from my New York days. We will continue to contribute to the dynamic development of relations between the UN and the ODKB, the CSTO. That's an important acronym again, Collective Security Treaty Organization, that more or less is the sort of the counterpart to NATO in the post-Soviet space. The EAS, okay, this is the Eurasian Economic Union, the EEU, if I'm not mistaken. I have to check it now. Yeah, we're having a veritable orgy of important acronyms in this text. Like this text, it covers this statement. It's really, really handy. It covers so many of the big issues, the important vocab, the acronyms. So the EAEU, the Eurasian Economic Union. And sometimes it's referred to just as the EEU. So I think you can use I think I've heard both, EAEU or the EEU. I guess if you say the EAEU, there's no confusion with the European Union. SNG is the CIS, Commonwealth of Independent States, for the purposes of rallying efforts in the Greater Eurasian space, or the Greater Eurasian region, if you want, for пространство, just сопряжение усилий for pooling efforts, for the purpose of pooling efforts in the Greater Eurasian region. Russia calls for scaling up work to settle regional conflicts. Считаем приоритетным задачей. I think, often I'll say if a speaker's going fast, you can just sort of leave out the считаем. You could just say here, priorities are breaking the stalemate. Okay, just say, just that, считаем приоритетными задачей. Приоритетными. Okay, so yeah, priorities are breaking the stalemate. Again, this is another favorite expression in Russian. Преодоление тупика. Breaking the stalemate when it comes to creating an independent Palestinian state, rebuilding what was destroyed by the NATO, what was destroyed by the NATO aggression in terms of the statehood of Iraq and Libya, neutralizing the threat to Syria's sovereignty, налаживание устойчивого процесса, establishing or forging a sustainable process of national reconciliation in Yemen, overcoming the painful NATO legacy in Afghanistan. We are seeking to revive возрождение in its original form, in its initial form, the JCPOA, the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action. So that's to do with the Iranian nuclear program, as he says. Okay, the JCP. You could just say here the JCPOA for совместного всеобъемлющего плана действий по иранской ядерной программе. Again, if you're trailing behind a bit, you just say the JCPOA. Ensuring a just or fair, comprehensive settlement of problems in the Korean Peninsula. The numerous conflict situations in Africa require us resisting the temptation, отказ от искушения, require us to resist the temptation to make them a subject of geopolitical zero-sum games. Again, all these expressions, zero-sum games, and consolidating the consolidation of foreign players in support of initiatives by the African Union. A cause of concern is the situation in Kosovo, Bosnia and Herzegovina. I'll often just drop the Herzegovina. I'll just often say Bosnia if I'm in a hurry. Where the US and the EU again, this is, what I was saying here. Okay, you could say literally that, they're stubbornly pursuing destruction of the international legal basis. Again, if you want to play around a bit, you could say seem to be hell-bent on destroying the international legal basis embodied in Security Council Resolution 1244 and the Dayton Peace Accords. In a time of change, man instinctively seeks support and comfort, or humanity, if you want to be gender neutral. Humanity instinctively seeks support and consolation, утешение, comfort, in the wisdom of their forebears, of their ancestors, who faced equally daunting challenges. That's a good way of, that's just come to me now, actually. На чью долю выпали не меньше испытания. Like you'd probably want to make that as a new sentence, just because again, when you have these на чью долю, it can lead, if you really follow the original Russian, the English can sound a bit strange. On whose shoulders fell no lesser tests, literally word for word. That sounds very awkward in English. So it's the idea is who faced equally daunting challenges, I think, is a good way of saying that in English. As former UN Secretary General Dag Hammarskjöld wisely noted, recalling the horrors of World War II. And the exact quote is, the UN was not created to take mankind to heaven, but to save humanity from hell. That is the exact quote that's given. But again, unless you happen to know that word for word, you'd have to just sort of wing it a little bit, improvise. The UN was created not to take humanity to heaven, but to save it from hell. These words are as relevant as ever. They call on us to recognize our individual and collective responsibility for creating conditions for a secure and harmonious development for future generations. For this, we all need to show political will. We are ready for such honest work, and we're convinced устойчивость миропорядка, the sustainability of the world order can only be guaranteed by a return to истокам ООНовской diplomacy, by return to maybe the origins, to the basics of UN diplomacy, to the first principles. That's an expression that we use quite a bit in English. First principle. We need to get back to getting back to first principles of UN diplomacy based on a key charter principle, the respect of sovereign equality of states. I thank you. So there you go. It's a real roller coaster ride there by Mr. Lavrov. I tell you what, I'm pretty knackered after taking you through all of that. Guys, I hope you found that commentary of mine useful. I hope you learned a lot of new words, a lot of new solutions. That's a really important statement. That's, as I say, it's got so many of the typical expressions, the ideas, concepts that are used by the Russians, but drawn from the Charter, but in their foreign political world view and so on. So you can get a massive amount out of just that one statement by Lavrov. So as I say, like, share, and subscribe if you've enjoyed it. Do tell me what stuff you've learned new, or if you've got any solutions yourself that I haven't mentioned that you think might contribute to enhancing our knowledge of or enhancing our approach to doing statements like this. Please do put that in the comments. So I feel pretty knackered after all that, so I think I'm going to go and have a relaxing swim in one of the pools outside. I think I've deserved it. Guys, it's been a pleasure as ever, and all that remains to be said is that episode 151 of the Interpretation Station stands adjourned.